for invitation for nice discussion, and wish you success with the whole symposium.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Goodbye. Al, whenever you want.
Okay. So this is who's it's just the four of us.
It seems
That's
so.
fine.
And yes, I
And
cannot.
no problem. No problem. Yeah. So I'm Al Galves. I'm a psychologist in New Mexico. I'm also the president of Mind Freedom International. Mind Freedom International is an organization, a nonprofit organization that's been advocating for human rights and psychology in the mental health system, advocating for human rights and mental health system since 1985, founded by David Oakes and Janet Foner. And so since that time, we've been really doing three things. One is advocating for human rights in mental health. The second thing is informing the public about what's going on and the way in which people's rights are being violated by the mental health system. And the third thing is promoting alternatives, promoting more safe, humane, life-enhancing ways of helping people. So one of the things we do is we have what's called the Mind Freedom Shield. And the Mind Freedom Shield is a solidarity network of people who join the network and they agree to help each other in the case in which a person is going to be involuntarily committed or forcibly treated. And so what happens is people who are involuntarily committed call Mind Freedom and they ask for an alert to be sent out. And an alert is sent out to the network, telling people about the situation and giving people the names and telephone numbers and emails of people they can call. And like hospital administrators, psychiatrists, legislators, et cetera, et cetera. So, and in fact, I have to tell you that Sarah Smith is on our call. And Sarah Smith is our program manager at Mind Freedom, and she really runs the Mind Freedom Shield. So what we do is we basically raise hell. We raise hell with people about it. We let them know what's going on. Hospital administrators, psychiatrists, legislators, governors, and we've had quite a bit of success. In fact, Murphy was talking about helping a person in Minnesota. About 15 years ago, we helped a man named Ray Sanford, who was being involuntary electroshocked. He was being electroshocked against his will. Basically, we went to Minnesota and we had a series of public meetings. We met with legislators. We eventually got him freed from that. The way we did it was by getting his guardian to use a different psychiatrist, to use a psychiatrist who wouldn't order electroshock. So there are various ways in which we can help people whose rights are being violated. That was one way. So what's going on in the United States right now? And I would say over the last 15 years, there's been a movement to involuntarily commit people to hospitals and to forcibly treat people, and that movement has grown and continues to grow. So now every state has a law that enables authorities to involuntarily commit a person to a psychiatric hospital as an inpatient, and all but 3 states have laws that enable authorities to force people into treatment even if they're not in an institution as outpatients. Only 3 states actually don't have those kinds of laws: Maryland, Massachusetts, and Connecticut. So, um, and when we talk about political abuses of psychiatry, um, basically, psychiatry is using the government, or the government is using psychiatry. I don't know how you'd want to say it. Psychiatry is using the government, but definitely, psychiatry and the government are complicit, are colluding in this movement to involuntarily commit people to treatment and to force treatment. So, just briefly, how is this an abuse? Why would we call this an abuse? Well, I can think of three ways. One, just incarcerating a person against their will and without due process of law is an abuse, and it's a political abuse, obviously, because it's being done by government. Um, the second way it's an abuse is that the treatment people receive is harmful to them, very harmful, because antipsychotic medicine, if we're talking about severe mental illness, antipsychotic medicine is extremely toxic. It causes tardive dyskinesia. If you take that medicine for 2 years, 3 years, you're going to come down with Parkinson's disease, the symptoms of Parkinson's. That isn't a surprise, since what the antipsychotics do is reduce dopamine in the brain. Well, the cause of Parkinson's disease is deficiency of dopamine. And the medicine that's used to treat Parkinson's is L-Dopa. It's a synthetic dopamine. So if you reduce dopamine, you increase the risk of a person getting Parkinson's. Then you have cognitive impairment, brain shrinkage. This is all evidence. Increased risk of diabetes and early death. People diagnosed with schizophrenia in the United States die 25 years younger than other people. And there are arguments about why this is true. Yes, they tend to be obese. They tend to smoke. Maybe don't get good treatment, but it's a dose responsive, the dose responsive thing. So that the more neuroleptic medicine people take, the earlier they die. So this is a serious violation. Harming people in that way against their will. And then the third way it's a violation is that the message people get, you have a brain disorder, your brain is not functioning, you have some kind of biochemical problem, genetic problem. That is very disempowering and very cynical. What is a person going to do about that? There's not much they can do about it. They're at the mercy of biological forces they don't have control over. So, that is a real violation. And also, although people don't realize this, if you talk to Americans about this, they say they believe that mental illnesses are caused by brain disorders, chemical imbalances, genetic problems, but they really don't believe that if you question them. So if you do believe that, you actually believe that human beings don't have any control over the faculties they use to live their lives. They don't have control over their thoughts, their emotions, their intentions, their behavior, which is extremely disempowering and cynical. And of course, on the other side of that is if you believe that, you take responsibility away from people. They're not responsible for whatever's going on with them. So these are ways in which this is extremely abusive and definitely political abuses of psychiatry. So how does this go on? Why are we able to go? By the way, it's getting worse. This is getting worse. California and New York City are both making it easier to involuntarily commit people to hospitals and to forcibly treat people. And, part of the problem is that I've already mentioned that, the treatment they get is not going to be helpful. The average length of stay in a mental hospital in the United States is 10 days. So what's going to happen? Let's say you take a person off the street. What this is being done in the guise of an answer to homelessness, right? Got all these homeless people in the United States. Any city you go into, a lot of homeless people. So you take a person off the street, put them in a hospital. They're going to be in there for 10 days. They're going to be drugged with a very toxic drug. They're going to go to a couple of group meetings, which isn't going to help them because it's not based on their individual situation, right? They're going to maybe have one session with a psychiatrist, which is going to be all about medication, and then they're going to be sent back out. So unless we build a lot more mental hospitals, this isn't really going to make much of a difference. So how is it that this goes on? How is it that the public supports this? That the general public doesn't raise hell about this and question elected officials and politicians? Wait a second, what's going on? Well, I'm going to piggyback on an idea of a guy named David Cohen, who is a professor at U.C.L.A. in School of Social Work and who studies psychiatric medicine and now is studying involuntary commitment. A terrific guy, David Cohen, Dr. David Cohen. David gave a talk about 6 years ago at a meeting of Mad in America, in which they showed films kind of about the harm done by psychiatry and biopsychiatry. And what David said is, he said, well, how is it that psychiatry maintains its authority in this country? That psychiatry maintains its authority and its reputation when there's so much evidence that it's harmful, its treatments don't work, they're not effective, they hurt people. There's no scientific foundation underneath their treatments and their beliefs. How is it that they maintain their authority? And his answer is that the general public believes that psychiatry protects them from crazy people. That the general society believes that. They believe, against the evidence, that people diagnosed with schizophrenia, people experiencing psychosis are dangerous, and psychiatry protects them. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. But I think there's another reason. There's another reason why this is going on. And there's another reason why elected officials, governments are more and more locking people up, locking homeless people up, putting people in hospitals against their will, involuntarily committed people. And I think a lot of it is what I would call unconscious guilt and shame on the part of elected officials, people in power. And I would say it's unconscious because I don't think people are doing this consciously with conscious intention, but I think they are doing it at a level of intentionality. And look, we all know that one of the really scary things about being a human being is some of our behavior, maybe much of our behavior, is driven by forces we're not aware of. That's really perverse because if we're not aware of the forces, what do we do about it? But so let me tell you why I think this. The Congress of the United States appropriates every year $3 trillion to the federal government to do what the federal government does. $3 trillion. Okay. Now, about half of that, more than half, is not discretionary. By that, I mean the Congress really doesn't have any control over it. It's used for Medicare, Medicaid, publicly supported health care, Social Security, and interest on the public debt. So the Congress doesn't have control over that money. But the Congress does have control over $1.3 trillion. $1.3 trillion. Now, let me tell you a difference between a million and a billion. 1.3 trillion is 1.3 thousand billion, right? Look at the difference between a million and a billion. In order to count to a million, to count to a million like this, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, would take you 3 months. To count to a billion would take you 30 years. 30 years to count to 1 billion. Now, so the Congress has $1.3 billion available to it to spend on the obligations and responsibilities of the federal government. 800 billion of that, folks, 800 billion is spent on the military, is spent on killing people, on purchasing weapons to kill people, building weapons to kill people, maintain 800 bases around the world, essentially maintain our empire. $800 billion every year, more than half of the discretionary money Congress has available to spend. And this year, the Congress gave the military, gave the Defense Department $24 billion more than they asked for. Now, a couple of other facts about here. We know that 10% of that money is spent on weapons the armed forces don't even want. Basically, it's a jobs program. It's a jobs program for scientists and engineers. And the Defense Department has manufacturing operations, defense operations in every congressional district in the country. So that's what's going on. And we know that with 15% of that budget. Oh, let me say another thing. Whenever they do an audit of the Defense Department, there's billions and billions of dollars of waste. They don't know where billions of dollars went, even. So here's the deal. With 15% of that money, we could totally solve the homeless problem in the United States. We could do what they did in Trieste, Italy. We could provide every homeless person with good housing, comfortable housing. Every homeless person could be provided with comfortable housing, with food, with safety and security, with health care. And beyond that, as they did in Trieste, we can make available to every homeless person, many of whom are mentally ill, diagnosed with severe mental illness. We could make available to every homeless person the services of a coach or a case manager or whatever you want to call the person, a community health worker, who could help that person find something meaningful to do and someone to love, right? Something meaningful to do, work, school, volunteer work, could help that person get into support groups, yoga, exercise, art, et cetera, and get connected to other people. We could provide that kind of intensive coaching where a coach has maybe 4 people to work with, and can really make a difference in the person's life. Now, 15% of that budget, we could solve the problem. So I really believe that in a way, what the people in power are doing is hiding the problem. They want to take people off the streets so we don't see it. And so they don't have to experience the guilt and the shame from not doing something about this problem. This is a problem that's totally solvable in this country. We know how to do it. I'll just give you a couple of examples of the kind of thing we know and we don't do anything about. Years ago, I read about a program for at-risk mothers. Now, if you wanted to increase the mental health of Americans in the long run, right? Probably the best thing you could do was provide every child in this country, every child with a nurturing, supportive, caring upbringing, right? Because, that's absolutely crucial to the mental health of people as they grow into adults. Well, years ago, there was a program that identified at-risk mothers, right? So you could do that pretty easily. Very young mothers, mentally ill people, mothers with mental illness, addicted mothers, mothers whose partners are addicted, etc. So what they did was make available to these mothers a trained nurse, social worker, counselor, uh, to help the mother 6 months before the birth and 1 year after. But here's the deal: each of these nurses and counselors and mothers only had 3 mothers to work with, 3 mothers. So they were available 24/7 to the mother. Mother's agitated, upset, doesn't know what to do. She can call this person. Come on over, I need help. So that kind of intensity of support to the mother uh, was what was done. And it worked. Less domestic violence, less children going into foster care. But that was a demonstration. When it was taken to scale, each of these nurses has 30 mothers. It doesn't work. You can't do it. We're not willing to spend the money that it takes to do this kind of thing because we're spending $800 billion a year on the war machine. Uh, Here's another example. Years ago, I befriended a man who was severely impaired, very difficult early life. Father was diagnosed with schizophrenia, mother's an alcoholic. He spends his early life in juvenile jails, foster homes, et cetera, et cetera. Uh, Good looking guy, uh, uh, healthy, strong, but extremely impaired, uh, addicted to legal drugs, illegal drugs, always on some kind of drug, didn't have the emotional maturity to work, et cetera, et cetera. He's on Social Security disability. He's getting $721 a month, and he's paying $550 for a motel room or a lousy apartment. So he only has $220 the rest of the month to live for food, medical care, transportation, et cetera, et cetera. Well, it can't work. So I knew about a program we have in the United States called Section 8 housing. And what that program does is provides people with a good rental unit for 1/3 of their income. Whatever their income is, 1/3, they pay 1/3, the federal government pays 2/3. So I went uh, to the Public Housing Authority to get him signed up for that program. They wouldn't even take his application. They had a waiting list of 2,000 in this town of 100,000. And I walked out feeling ashamed of my government. My government is unwilling to put the money into a program that's there, to take it to scale where it actually could help people who need help. So that's what's going on in this country. Uh, we don't have the political will to help people in a safe, humane, life-enhancing way. We just don't. And so what we're doing is hiding the problem, um, or taking what we would call a quick and dirty approach to it, rather than an approach that we know would work. We just have to spend money on it. You know, we had a war on poverty, 1966 to 1974. Um, but we never spent uh, enough money on it to help more than 15% of the people who were poor. So it was a nice idea, but it was never financed to scale, and it ran afoul of the Vietnam War. So let me go into something that Murphy talked a little bit about, which is the hegemony of psychiatry that is supported by beliefs that appear to be common sense. Um, but if you really look into them, they aren't common sense, but they are helpful to the institutions in power. So, what are the institutions in power in the United States that are basically supporting these political abuses? Well, there's the government, of course. And then there's mainstream psychiatry, which, well, let's face it, if you can see 4 patients a day for medication consults, 4 patients an hour, right? You can see 4 patients an hour for medication consults, but in order to do therapy, psychotherapy, decent psychotherapy, you can see maybe 1 patient an hour. You're going to make a lot more money prescribing medicine, right? So you got mainstream psychiatry being complicit, and then you have the drug companies. And the drug companies are the most powerful lobby in Congress. The drug companies have 3 lobbyists for every congressperson. Let's face it, these decisions about how the government spends its money are made by 535 people. That's who makes the decision. 535 people. We're not talking about, something that's unsolvable, involving millions and millions of people. So these are the institutions that are in power, let's say, over the mental health of Americans and the treatment that's provided. Well, they have an interest in keeping things the way they are. And one of the ways they do that is do what Michel Foucault called use the dividing practice. Basically, you convince people that the people who are quote unquote mentally ill are somehow fundamentally different from other people, and do not really deserve to receive the kind of support and care that other people deserve to receive. And you find a way to, in some way, convince people that that's the case. So, to give you an example of this kind of what appears to be common sense, but really isn't, I interviewed 10 people. I did this maybe about 10 years ago. And this was not a scientific study. This was just me interviewing 10 people. Some of them were my friends. I asked them, well, what do you think causes mental illness? And they all said something physiological. It's a brain disorder, it's a chemical imbalance, it's a genetic problem. And then I asked them, I said, well, what do you think happened to change the brain chemistry? What do you think happened to change the brain, the chemistry, the genetics? What? And they all said, oh, something happened to the person. Something happened to the person. So I said, wait a second. You just told me that this was caused by some kind of biochemical imbalance, some kind of brain disorder, some kind of genetic anomaly. Now you're telling me that something happened to the person. Well, what is it? And they all went, oh, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, and then I asked them the final question. Here's the question. Do you think there's a difference between how a person is reacting to his or her life situation, his or her life, concerns that he or she has about her life or herself? Is there a difference between that and a diagnosable mental illness? And they all said yes. They all said yes. So that's ridiculous. They just told me no. It was because something happened to the person. So there's this confusion in the general public about what mental illness is and how it should be treated. So that's where we are. And I think there's some other, Murphy mentioned some of the reasons why biopsychiatry has become so powerful. The cult of science, the cult of professionalism, the belief in instrumentality, in technology, but also some other factors. The idea, if you believe that people that the state of being, the mood, the thoughts, the emotions, the behaviors we call mental illnesses, if you believe they're caused by physiology, you believe that people aren't to blame for them, right? You take away blame. They're not to blame, it just happened to them. They're not responsible, right? Well, of course, as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't make sense to blame anybody for anything, because people they don't choose their parents, they don't choose their early lives. So why are we going to blame people for anything? Because their early lives and their parents have great impact on their later lives. So, but that's another reason. There are forces at work here that are very powerful. Um, uh, what are some of the other ones? Well, the belief in the quick and easy solution, right? I can take a pill and it'll solve my problems, um, rather than having to learn about myself, learn how to manage myself, learn how to manage my thoughts, my emotions, my perceptions, my intentions. So let me say something else about the drugs too, the way in which they're toxic. All psychiatric drugs impair, um, they impair emotional processing. All psychiatric drugs uh, take away conscience and caring. They numb emotions. So Peter Kramer, the author of Listening to Prozac, a psychiatrist, when he wrote the book about how great Prozac was for his patients, and he said in the book, he said, I noticed that my patients on Prozac lost their conscience. They lost their conscience. They didn't care. They lost some of their caring, as if that's not a problem. So you may not know this, or you may know it. On the medicine boxes, on all antidepressant medicines, there's a black box warning, which says this medicine increases the risk of suicide and violence in people up to the age of 25. Well, if you take away caring, you increase the risk of suicide and violence. It's a no-brainer, right? Um, the main reason people don't kill themselves is because they know it would be devastating for their families and friends. If you take away caring, people are more likely to hurt other people and hurt themselves. Um, so this is another of the ways in which uh, uh, psychiatric medicine are harmful. So let me just say a little bit about what do we do about this. Uh, what are we going to do about it? Well, there are organizations that are working on changing things, whatever you want to call it, reform, abolishing forced treatment, et cetera, et cetera. I already told you about Mind Freedom International. And by the way, we need money. We're limping along right now. So if you know anybody who wants to donate, www.mindfreedom.org. There's the International Society for Ethical Psychiatry and Psychology, which you can see at www.psychintegrity.org. I'll put these in the chat. There's the International Society for Psychological and Social Approaches to Psychosis, which Murphy mentioned. ISPS, www.isps-us.org. There's it's called the Network Against Psychiatric Assault, which I think is a Canadian organization. And there's an organization called the National Association for Rights Protection and Advocacy, NARPA, www.narpa.org. There are peer groups in California that are fighting against what's going on in California. California passing laws making it easier to involuntarily commit people to hospitals, forcibly treat people, etc. So one of the ways I look at this is because I think we're up against a pretty powerful force, and I mean, I'm not really confident that we're going to be able to make a lot of headway in the short run against this force. But I'm encouraged by two examples in history. Okay, two examples in history. One is the suffragette movement, the effort by American women to get the vote and to get the right to have bank accounts, to take loans out, to start businesses, etc. So let me tell you how long that took. The first bill to provide for women being able to vote in the United States was introduced into the United States Congress in 1870. 1870. People had been talking about that certainly 20 years prior to that. It didn't happen until 1920. So we're talking about 75 years for a no-brainer to happen. A no-brainer, right? Women being able to vote. That's a no-brainer. We look at it now. Took 75 years. And during those years, these women, these amazing women, just worked at it. They went to conferences, they sent letters to the editor, they made speeches, they talked to elected officials. They did it for 75 years, and finally it paid off. Another example is the dissolution of the Soviet Union. It happened in 1989. It seemed to happen kind of quickly. All of a sudden, there's Gorbachev and Yeltsin, and the wall comes down. Oh my God, happened quickly. But the seeds of that were planted in 1930 in the living rooms of ordinary people, talking to themselves, saying, "This isn't going to work. This system is not going to work." And you had the dissidents and the Gulag and all of the artists. So over those years, it took 60 years or 50 years for that to eventually end up in the dissolution of the Soviet Union. So I think that's what's going to happen in our movement. At some point, this is all going to stop. And we're going to stop the involuntary commitment, the forced treatment. That's going to happen quicker. And eventually, the general public will stop using psychiatry, say, no, we're not going to use those toxic medicines. That's not the way we want to get help. We want safe, humane, life-enhancing approaches. We want soteria houses. We want open dialogue. We want Hearing Voices Network. We want psychotherapy. We want acupuncture. We want yoga. We want art. We want help with using our thoughts and our emotions and our intentions and our perceptions in effective ways. So I think eventually that's what will happen. I want to tell you about, and it's going to be the work that we're doing, you see. We're doing the same work the suffragettes did, the same work the dissidents in the Soviet Union did, the work that we're doing, laying the foundation, speaking truth, illuminating the problem, talking to legislators, getting the word out, et cetera, making films. This is what's going on, and I think eventually it's gonna work. I want to tell you about a man named Morris Berman, an author. He's written a number of books. One of his books is called The Twilight of American Culture, or I think The Twilight of the American Century, maybe. The Twilight of the American Century. He wrote the book about, how the United States is in decline. He had 4 criteria for declining cultures. One was increasing inequalities of wealth and income. The second was decreasing returns from investments in technology. And you can see the military-industrial complex as that. That is a investment in technology which does not provide help to the American people. And then dumbing down of the population and loss of spirituality, I think. But what he said was, people who see the truth, and okay, maybe we don't know the truth. Maybe we don't. We think we know the truth. But since we think we know the truth, we need to spread it. We need to speak it. We need to basically do what we can to make it happen. What we need to do is what the monks did during the Dark Ages. What the monks did was write down the work of the Greeks. Write down, inscribe the work of the Greek philosophers so that it wouldn't get lost. And what we're doing in a way is also similar to what they did. Let me just go over my notes and see if there's anything else. Oh, let me tell you about a particularly egregious case that's going on right now, and that is the object of a Mind Freedom Shield alert, which Sarah is managing. There's a woman named Dawn DeZuba who is incarcerated in a forensic hospital, military hospital in St. Louis. She's been there since 2014, basically incarcerated, not charged with any crime, has not had a trial, not allowed to have a lawyer. And here's the reason why she's there. She was working with a group of people at Washington University, and I don't know, it's at Washington University in St. Louis. I don't know if that's a public institution or not. I was going to try to find out. Maybe someone can Google and find out if Washington University is a public institution. She was working with a group that was essentially administering a federal grant, working on a federal grant, and she began to believe that the group was acting illegally, was breaking the law, was violating the contract it had with the federal government, and she began to complain and raise questions and concerns. And the people who ran it retaliated and basically told her, "You better shut up, or we're gonna take care of you." And they did eventually. Eventually, she apparently made some kind of a threat, and I don't know enough about the nature of her threat to know whether it was a legitimate reason to lock her up. But that's what was done to her. She was locked up, and she's been locked up since 2014, declared incompetent with a guardian not of her choosing. So Mind Freedom right now is working on an alert, trying to get her freed. And we're getting some traction with state legislators in Missouri. So that's another example of the kind of thing that's going on in this country that is really horrible and is essentially the political abuse through the use of psychiatry. Anything else? I guess I just follow up by saying it is pretty amazing that there's not more concern about so many Americans being hurt, being harmed, with no due process rights, with their rights to due process being violated, and without a lot of concern or upset about it. Something to wonder about. How does that happen? How's that going on? Invoking Michel Foucault. Okay. That's it.
Thank you so much, Al. Thank you.
And by the way, Enrique, apparently you have an open slot at 11 or at 10. No.
If the last from 19 CS time, the last one, yeah, that I thought that it was gonna be Mind Freedom, like a collective one or somebody else.
Yeah.
The last one. Yes.
What time is that gonna be?
Let me double check. I do not want to screw the time.
I see on the schedule you have Kelechi Ubozo and Rob Wypond scheduled for the start in 15 minutes, if I'm reading the time correctly.
Yeah, that's correct. That's 16 hours in Europe. I'm saying after them. After them, there is a slot free, if you want to call it, but honestly, there is nothing after that slot. So it's just
Okay, so
we will end.
that's 11 Eastern, no, 11 Mountain, 10 Pacific. The reason I'm wondering, Sarah Smith is on this call with us, and I don't know if Sarah would want to take that slot, want to present during that slot. Sarah, do you want to do that? I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. It took me a while to figure out how the audio works. I am hesitant to take that slot. I will if no one else wants to fill it, but I was hoping to do my presentation on the 27th.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, we don't have anybody to fill that slot. So
It's completely fine because it's the last one. So we finish earlier, and that's it. No problem. I will stay here if in case somebody else connects. Just tell them that on the 27th we're gonna have the mind freedom that we were expecting today, and that's it. I will stay connected to notify. Sarah, you do not need to do it today, and I'm sorry that I misunderstood.
well, it was our fault. Henry. It was our fault. Yeah, okay. Well, any questions, comments, thoughts?
Salud first.
Yeah.
Bless you. Bless you. Salud. Yeah.
But that's a very interesting talk. You mentioned, Al, that the only states that did not have, where it was not legal to involuntarily commit someone were Maryland, Connecticut, and Massachusetts.
That's right. Murphy outpatient. They
Outpatient, yeah, right. And well, my work recently with the Hearing Voices movement, I was connected to the Wildflower Alliance. I don't know if you know them in Massachusetts.
I do. That's a great organization. Yes, absolutely.
And one of the things that I just saw recently in their newsletter, well, this summer, was that they were trying to oppose a bill in the Massachusetts State Senate to allow for involuntary outpatient treatment. So that's something that's going on right now. There's an attempt to pass that in Massachusetts. So maybe, and you're right to mention that the cases in New York and California, I think we may be going towards more involuntary treatment in this country than we had before. And so, but I just wanted to call that to your attention. I recently saw that from the Wildflower Alliance newsletter that they email. They have been trying to oppose that.
Let's see what they can do. In 2021, the Congress passed a law. Our Congress passed a law that incentivized states to pass outpatient commitment laws, gave them money, money to states if they would pass outpatient commitment laws. And so that's one of the things that's been happening. So I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad they're fighting, and I hope they're successful. We tried to fight it in New Mexico, and we successfully did it for 3 or 4 years. And what we found, Murphy, was that the elected officials who were most on our side were Republicans of a libertarian bent. They don't like the idea that the government can force people, to do anything. They don't like the idea of governmental force at all. But if you force people to be injected with a toxic drug, they basically reacted. I said no.
Yeah. Okay.
So they were our allies. We're the kind of libertarians. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's good to have diverse political allies. And also in your talk, I liked how you adopted Michel Foucault and some of those other orientations to power that I was mentioning. I think it's I think you also mentioned that there are 3 pharmaceutical lobbyists for every elected official in Congress. And I think that's important to keep in mind. And when we talk about the system of power, or we're talking about who's taking these actions in the U.S., it's easy to sort of imagine a they, or we imagine the government does this. but I mean, it's hard to say who does. To me, it's some degree something we might call our cultural belief in technology. But also we might think of the government as merely, the avenue through which, pharmaceutical company priorities get enacted into law, and the pharmaceutical companies don't have absolute control over policy either. It's sort of a combination, I think, of sort of our folk culture, which is influenced by the biomedical model. But I think it's important in the U.S., especially, to try to sort of maintain. I don't know if we know who has the power ultimately, but it's a diversity of actors. Where the government is often not all powerful. They're influenced by other forces, and they can also be an ally. And I think it's good to be able to enlist the variety of allies that are out there. I think even also not just libertarians. I wonder if more mainstream Republicans might also support this too, just because, especially after the COVID crisis, there was a lot of skepticism, not just on the far right, but in the mainstream right, about, what can we all agree upon as evidence-based? What is an appropriate role for the government in terms of coercing people to do things? I think actually there might be a growing audience on the center right to be skeptical of coerced treatment.
Yeah. I think I'm a member of a group called, it's a small group called Coalition Against Medicalized Psychiatry and Psychology. We put out a video basically demonstrating the evidence that there's an association between psychiatric medicine and mass murders. The culture is concerned about mass shootings. Most of the shooters have either been on medication, psychiatric medication, or are on psychiatric medication. And I just made the point that these medications take away caring and conscience. And so we actually put a video out to that effect, because, apparently we're not going to get rid of guns, even assault rifles. So maybe this is another approach, but it really didn't get a lot of traction. There's a guy named John Spagnola who has gotten the Congress to pass a law creating a study, funding a study of the association between medicine, psychiatric medicine, and suicide among veterans, right? So he got that study funded, but it hasn't been done. It's not been implemented. Now, unfortunately, John is a member of Scientology, of the Citizens Commission for Human Rights, which is financed and part of Scientology. And Scientology, which does a really terrific job of creating doubt. Scientology does a terrific job of creating doubt, or trying to create doubt in the general public about the value of psychiatric medicine and mainstream psychiatry, but they're considered to be a cult, which they are, and they're dismissed. They're dismissed as being a bunch of cult people who are radicals. So interesting, yeah. It's interesting to be aware of the forces that support this, and what we're going to have to do to really make headways against those forces. I do think it's good that the United Nations is raising doubt about the value of the medical model and raising awareness about the harm that's done by biopsychiatry, that treatment based on the medical model. I think it really is good that I don't know what his name is, Danis Prius, is that his name? The special rapporteur has
Yes,
has made I think a really good,
remarkable coincidence.
yeah.
Detectives discovered that this person was actually Shakir Washington,
Muted.
who was Sage's real.
That Danis is doing what he's doing and that the United Nations is raising questions, as well as raising concerns about the human rights issues involved with this. So that is a really positive, real positive.
May I ask who's paying for the bills, for the drugs, for the medication? Who's
Oh,
paying?
Who's paying? Who's paying for the drugs? Well, it's being paid by the drugs are being paid for by the private insurers, the private insurance companies, but also by Medicaid and Medicare, by the federal government. And that's a good question, Enrique, because Medicaid will pay for the drugs. Medicaid, which is a federal program to pay for health care for low-income people. Medicare, which is health care for seniors. Medicare and Medicaid pays for the drugs, but they won't pay for a Soteria house or for open dialogue approach to helping people with psychosis, or for healing homes, which was a program developed by Karina Hackinson in Sweden based on the Heal Belgium model. What they did in Sweden, what Karina did was train families. She trained families, many of them were farm families, in how to provide supportive environments for people going through psychosis, safe, supportive, affirming environments. She trained families in how to do that. They placed people experiencing psychosis with those families. They provided supervision of the families and therapy to the patients, and effective. But Medicaid won't pay for that. Medicare won't pay for that. So we've got this problem of instrumentality, if you want to call it, the cult of professionalism, belief in psychiatrists, the cult of science. We'll pay for the high-tech approaches, quote unquote. We'll pay for the mechanistic approaches, but we won't pay for the safe, supportive, affirming approaches based on relationship, based on the understanding that psychosis is a move by a wounded psyche to heal itself, based on the evidence that tells us that if you provide a person in a psychotic experience with that kind of safety, support and affirmation and relationship, they will recover. They will recover at high rates, at much higher rates. You know, everybody should read this book. This book, I'll put it in the chat after I stop. It's called Anatomy of an Epidemic. Anatomy of an Epidemic, Magic Bullets, Psychiatric Drugs, and the Astonishing Rise of Mental Illness in America by Robert Whitaker. Robert Whitaker is a science journalist, terrific journalist, scientist. In that book, he explains what happened, how mainstream psychiatry took over the mental health system, and how they did it based on phony research, on fake research. And he looked at all the research. And so he writes based on his study of all the research, and he presents convincing evidence that the psychiatric drugs actually hurt people and that people recover. The people who recover from psychosis are people who stopped using the drugs or never took the drugs. And one of his pieces of evidence is that the number of Americans who received Social Security based on a mental illness, Social Security disability based on a mental illness diagnosis, has risen from 1 in 750 in 1950 to 1 in 75 today. And he points out that the recovery rate from schizophrenia using conventional treatment hasn't increased since 1900. It's still less than 15%. So, you know, the system that we're using, the conventional treatment just isn't working. It doesn't help. And you have Soteria houses, open dialogue. Open dialogue reports an 80% recovery from first episode. And it's now beginning to be used in the United States, thank God. But it's still not in the mainstream. It's still not paid for by the insurers. or by the federal government.
But by the way, I interviewed an open dialogue practitioner recently and part of this new research project I'm doing, and asked her how insurance works with her. And she actually says insurance will pay for it. You just have to know how to you can actually bill it as family therapy. The thing it doesn't include, you can't have multiple mental health practitioners, which you should have in the open dialogue model. Insurance won't pay for that, but she says you can kind of approximate it in private practice.
Thank you for pointing that out, because I am participating in an open dialogue approach with a patient, and I'm getting paid by the insurance company. So
Okay, good.
so you just, classify it as family therapy and you can get paid. Yeah.